I have a theory about Battlefield 5's 6th chapter, and I want to share it with you guys. Over the last week or so, certain details have cropped up, and they've given me an idea of what DICE might be planning for this next big shift with the Tides of War. We're only a couple of weeks away from the end of Chapter 5, there's just 2 weekly rewards left, and I think it can be assumed that there will be some sort of small gap in between the end of Chapter 5 and the launch of Chapter 6, so likely we're going to see Chapter 6 in early February, maybe mid-February, something like that. Previous chapters have followed this pattern as well, so I see no reason why this would be any different. We already know Chapter 6 is going to happen. That was confirmed a long time ago by EA stating that DICE would support Battlefield 5 through the year 2020, and more recently it was confirmed in the This Week in Battlefield post on Reddit last Monday, so that put to bed the rumours that DICE would be stopping support for Battlefield 5 that have started to circulate in the last couple of weeks, in the absence of really any official information or communication from the studio. But then we have only just come back from the Christmas holidays, so I wasn't really expecting that much communication that quickly. But as I say, these little drops of information that we've gotten so far, they have given me an idea of where Chapter 6 could be going. And I think it might excite a lot of players who felt the Pacific maps were missing something in particular. Okay, I think Chapter 6 is going to continue with the Pacific Theatre, and I've said this before, but what I think we're going to see in greater emphasis is naval warfare. Now, of course, the 3 Pacific maps that we've had so far, they've been set on islands in the Pacific, which means there has been water involved, but most of that action has kind of been limited to invasion-style pushes by the American faction. They have the Higgins boats built to land on beaches, and the Japanese don't really have anything similar. The Japanese have the dinghies, but they're not exactly great landing craft. There are amphibious tanks for both of the factions, but most of the time I'm seeing players using those purely to transport themselves across the water onto other pieces of land, rather than using them as actual amphibious attack vehicles. Now with Chapter 6, I think we're going to see a pivot away from that invasion-style Pacific content that we've seen in Chapter 5 towards proper naval, water-based combat. And here's why I think that. First of all, we have this piece of concept art. This was uploaded to ArtStation over the holidays by a concept artist at DICE, and it shows off a submarine. And as far as I can tell, this is not a piece of concept artwork that has been shown publicly before, but it may be included in the Battlefield 5 art book, which does have plenty of images other than what you can find online. There's even concept art in that book depicting the destruction of a gigantic sea fort, which would be an amazing map, I'm sure. But for the submarine though, the image is labelled with a 2018 copyright mark, so safe to assume that these were created before the launch of the game, but that doesn't mean that the concepts were for areas of the game that were up for addition with just the launch. They can always be for something else further down the line. That concept artwork book that I was talking about, that shows up a few more mock-ups of action happening in the Axis-captured oil fields in southern Europe, where the Allies used day and night bombing to try and disrupt that supply line. And of course there's no content at all resembling that in the base game or at launch, or indeed anything that we've seen so far. So that could always be coming in the future as well. However, I do believe that this submarine in this image is a German one, not a Japanese one, and certainly not an American one, which does somewhat hurt my theory that DICE is working on submarine warfare for Chapter 6. Submarines do already appear in Battlefield 5, it's just they're not in the multiplayer. At the end of the Nord-Lys war story, the Germans are attempting to load heavy water onto a submarine that has emerged from under a frozen lake. And if you look at the hull of the submarine in this clip here, and then you compare it to the concept artwork, they do look very familiar. So yes, this is a piece of concept art that shows a submarine, but maybe it's not the submarine warfare that we're hoping for in Chapter 6. You never know. It's part of my theory anyway. The second element of my theory, it takes information from a data mine by Temporyal just before the launch of the Pacific, towards the end of 2019. He garnered this information after the Pacific patch had launched, but the new maps hadn't been made available yet, and he found references to PT boats in the files, and that suggested that DICE could be adding these vehicles into the Pacific chapter as naval combat craft. Now, of course, having played through most of Chapter 5 and not seen any PT boats at all, we know that perhaps these references might have been a little bit premature. And sometimes, if you look at the content that Tempoyal does actually data mine, most of the time, we don't see that content reach the game for several months. We see references, then we see a little bit more, and then if it does come to the game, we see more fully formed content. There's also the element that the maps that have been released so far for the Pacific Theatre don't massively focus on naval combat anyway. They're all focused around this invasion fantasy, where the naval combat is still there, but it's limited in favour of landing boats on beaches and then pushing the fight onto islands instead. We've played 3 of the 4 maps for Chapter 5, the 4th one is coming very soon, and they all focus around the Americans landing on beaches and then pushing back against the Japanese. So there wasn't a huge focus on naval combat anyway, and so that's perhaps why we haven't seen PT boats so far. Now, when Tempoyal found references to these PT boats in the files at the end of October, only 2 of them were found, the PT-1 MTB and the Elco PT boat, and both of these were created by Allied forces. The PT-1 was a British-designed motor torpedo boat, and the US Navy ended up constructing some of those for themselves, and the Elco PT, that was a torpedo-armed fast attack vessel used by the United States. Now, considering that these references are still the only information that we have so far about boats maybe coming to Battlefield 5, the lack of a Japanese equivalent is slightly concerning. Now, the Japanese did have their own PT boat work happening during World War II with the Type T-14 and the Type T-51, so there is definitely a vehicle out there that DICE could use as an equivalent to these American and British vessels. It's just that right now we don't really know if that's going to happen or not. I think the T-14 would be the most likely candidate to be added. It's a little bit smaller and a bit more mobile than the T-51. Now, having PT boats in Battlefield 5 on some proper naval warfare maps, that would give players an option for a faster moving vehicle on the battlefield, similar to the attack boats that DICE used on their naval warfare maps in Battlefield 4. With torpedoes mounted to the sides, these could be deployed to attack larger ships that are out there in the waters, but these vessels would likely have little to no armor defense, so they would probably struggle if they were hit by enemy fire. But let's say you came up against an American amphibious tank that was swimming through the water, you might be able to outmaneuver it due to the tank's low turret speed. So there's a little bit of balance to play with there, and there's a potential space in there to have this naval combat vehicle active on some naval warfare maps. The third piece to my Chapter 6 puzzle comes from a more recent data mine entry, again by Tempoyal, the addition of UI elements for enemy bailed and enemy crashed. Now, the speculation at the moment is that these entries might be the start of some kind of last hit system that's going to reward attacking pilots with extra points. The enemy bailed system might award points if the enemy pilot bails at the last moment, and that causes you to miss out on a kill, but maybe you're rewarded with some extra points instead. And enemy crashed, that may award points if you're the pilot who contributes to the crash of an enemy plane. Now, both of these are clearly linked into pilot gameplay, which was a big part of the Pacific conflict during World War II. And those 2 new UI elements would also fit nicely into game modes or maps where piloting of planes was a big feature. For example, if DICE created a map almost entirely set out at sea, perhaps around a small island, similar to Wake Island in fact, then that would surely see an increase in the amount of pilots looking to bail out if their plane was too damaged to carry on, or crashing their plane into the water, for example. Perhaps a plane-only game mode like Air Superiority from Battlefield 3 or Air Assault from Battlefield 1. Those UI elements could work really well there too. And then lastly, for my theory around Chapter 6, we have the new Megalodon skin that was recently data mined by Tempoyal. This is earmarked as a skin for Chapter 6, and it pays homage to some of the games gone past, where the community came together to unlock the mystery of the Megalodon, found on the Nansha Strike map from Battlefield 4's Naval Strike DLC. Along with this skin, Tempoyal does say there are various other ocean-themed skins on the way too, and I know a lot of you out there aren't the slightest bit interested in cosmetics in Battlefield 5, but they have often helped us figure out themes and directions for the game, so overall, I think this is actually the biggest clue towards Chapter 6 being a naval-themed one, with the focus remaining on the Pacific for a few more months, but instead of land-based activity, we might be looking at a couple of maps set out in open water. So there we go, that's my Chapter 6 theory, and I could be completely wrong, and I'm actually expecting to be proven quite wrong by DICE when they come out and give us some official info. I think it is worth remembering that all of the info that I've spoken about in this video is either speculation or from data mines at the moment, so, you know, don't take it as absolutely 100% true, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to assume that Chapter 6 will actually be naval-themed. I've got quite a few points here that I think tie together quite nicely, so that's my bet for Chapter 6. It's going to be a naval-themed update. What do you think, though? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Are you a fan of naval combat, or would you prefer Battlefield 5 to move on from the Pacific to something new? A big thank you for watching today, and until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.